I'm pleased to welcome Mary Knight to Unbroken. Mary is a survivor of satanic ritual abuse, and she has made a spectacular documentary where she explores the False Memory Syndrome Foundation and this movement to sort of societal movement to deny trauma, and which I highly recommend everyone watch. It's brilliant. And so I'm so pleased to have you here, Mary.
Thank you.
So I thought we could just start with, what's your story? I mean, as much of it as you want to share with us and kind of give us a little background on you.
Okay. And I always start by saying that I have a really wonderful life now. And I wrote a book, My Life Now, Essays by a Child Sex Trafficking Survivor. So I titled it that because I do have such a good life now. And I like to start with that because there were many years when I wondered if I would ever have a good life. But now I do. It's like my dreams have come true. I'm happily married. I got married in 2010 and we own our home. I have a view. I can see the Canadian mountains on a clear day from my back porch. So I'm in Bellingham, Washington, in far north Washington State. So and children are a part of my life as much as I want them to be, which is really nice. So I have grandchildren, but I also have two children I choose to babysit, and I also do psychotherapy with children and also with adults. My life during my childhood was bad, very bad. I am the survivor, like you, of satanic ritual abuse, of torture, of incest, child sex trafficking, child pornography. So all those things happened to me. My father had a dark room in our house. So he actually was a very good filmmaker, photographer, and he produced child pornography using me. My mother was involved. My other film, which I hope you see the one later, maybe you'll want to watch, Mothers and Molestation, a film about child abuse, and it's on my YouTube channel. It's free. It's on my website. Also, I find it a little easier to watch than the one you watched because it's about mothers and daughters, but there's a mother and daughter on the screen a lot of the time who it's like this mother broke the cycle. So she's a survivor of satanic ritual abuse, but her daughter, who's 30 now, has never been abused by anyone. And so it's like, it's heartwarming to know that the cycle can break and they just have a wonderful relationship. I was really glad to get that interview. I experienced religious abuse in a conservative Christian church. I still really like religion to this day. My husband's Jewish and we're synagogue members, but I also go to church. I take communion. And in the film that you saw, Am I Crazy? My Journey to Determine If My Memories Are True, I didn't go into detail about that in the film. I do in my book, but they did things to try to desecrate the Christian concept of communion. And yeah, they tried to desecrate it, but they didn't, because I still like to take communion. And my father was a really good song leader at our church. I still like Christian music. So although my views are much more broad now as far as religion. I go into detail. I'm not going to now, but I go into detail in my book, more detail probably than more detail than in my films. So what I have in my book, My Life Now, is essays, and each of them have trigger warnings. So most have low trigger warnings and are good, maybe helpful for survivors to read. Like I have one, How I Healed. The longest one is How I Healed, and it gives a lot of practical ideas. But I also have 3 essays in it that are extremely triggering. And there's no need for a survivor to read it unless a survivor wants to see like what commonalities that person has with me. And I do get messages from people who say, I haven't told other people the details, but my childhood was just like yours. I haven't met anyone else who's worse. So I do go into detail in 3 of the essays. And I would caution, be careful, when you read those, or you might have someone else read them and tell you about them, and that might be less triggering. One of those essays involves my parents being involved in the KKK.
Wow. Okay. I actually have found it strangely, very soothing to hear about other survivor stories because it really helped me. I mean, I thought I was crazy too, because, you just go through these things that shouldn't even happen at all on Earth. And initially, I didn't know there was anybody else. So for me, it was actually really helpful to hear other people's stories. And it was astonishing the overlap, like how many similarities are. And then that led me to understand that the satanic cult that does this, that pretty much runs the world, they have their methods, and their methods, they basically have a handbook, manual for what they do, because so many of the things that I went through, I have now discovered dozens and dozens of other survivors have been through. So
Yeah.
I really good point.
One thing, I only tell what happened to me. And one thing I find, it's hard to debate with someone because then you're debating with an 8-year-old little girl who was just traumatized. So I don't get into the kind of the intellectual thing of how often this happens, of how organized it is. But what I find with these cults is they do a lot of things related to death and the body when someone dies. I talked to someone in India, and she had not heard of the kind of abuse I was talking about. And she said, they don't do burials in India, they do cremation. But she said in India, there's people who live among the ashes and the cremation. And that as I was telling her things, she's like, oh, I wonder what they do with children there. There's probably atrocities within that group of people within India. It's different because they don't do burials. But so that's what I find is that it's done a lot. They try to mess with anything that could help you get out, what can help you get out? I personally, and I don't try to get other people to believe this, but I personally believe in God. And I find that most survivors believe in a higher power of some sort. And I call my higher power God. And they don't want you to be able to connect with God. And yet from a really young age, I did. I was, when I was 5 years old, I had what may have been a near-death experience, but I feel like I saw and talked to God. And so God has been really helpful to me as I've healed and am still healing. So I know I'm different than some satanic ritual abuse survivors and advocates in that I don't go into kind of the history and that type of thing. I just talk about what I know from firsthand. And I do know that my aunt says it went back to her great-grandparents, who would be my great-great-grandparents. So she has reason to believe it went back that far. Another thing I wanted to say, because, I don't know. I made my film was called Am I Crazy? My Journey to Determine If My Memories Are True. But because I just can't imagine if I believed this, and when I made my film, I had believed it for 20 years, how, if it wasn't true, how that could be, how that could be, unless I'm just crazy. But as far as really thinking I was crazy, when I first remembered my abuse, I already had a master's degree in social work. I was 37 years old. I was testifying in court on disputed custody matters. Judges trusted me. Judges wanted me to tell them which home should the kids live, with mom or with dad, and how many visits. They trusted me at that level. And so it would have been hard to really think I was crazy, that, but also I was so fortunate that I now have 5 relatives with similar memories. At the time I remembered, I had 4. I had 3 cousins and my father's sister. So I could, when I remembered something, I could call one of them. And the memory associated with the KKK, I have in that essay. I called my cousin and asked him, and he just matter-of-factly told me he didn't have the exact same experience, but it was quite similar. So so they were really helpful to me. Now, I will also say that over time, in families where there is incest, there tends to be a lot of competition between women. There tends to be a lot of other dysfunction. And over time, these same relatives are not in touch with me now. I'm in a little bit of contact with one cousin, and that's the cousin who was in that film. I talk to her maybe every couple of years, which I'd like to talk to her more, but it's so hard for us to be close because of so many different dysfunctions in the family. And there's things about my family that I don't really say, but I put as much as I was comfortable saying in my essay entitled Family in my book. And it does tell quite a bit about why, the dysfunction, why I'm not in contact with these relatives and that sort of thing.
Yeah. A couple of things. I think it's normal, like when you were 37, I was in my early 40s when the memories, I had some memories, but when the more kind of horrific ones came back, and it was after I'd had my daughter. And I remember the intensity of that because I felt like I was crazy, because how could I have not remembered these things? Now, on the other hand, when they all came back, there was no way to deny it because I would wake up with nightmares that were in fact memories, and I would be screaming and sweating. I mean, you can't make that up. And then the emotions that would come out. So also the pieces that came out made the rest of my life make much more sense. It was like my life had these big holes, right? And I was like,
Me too.
oh, okay.
Me too.
But it also feels crazy because I felt like I don't even know who I am. How could I have carried this for 40 some years, right? But that is the way that trauma works. There's this dialectical between it coming out and it being repressed. And that has happened throughout society as well. So even, I don't know if people know this, and I've said this before, but back in the day when Charcot in the 1800s was parading women on stage, and because they had hysteria, thinking it was because they had a uterus, Freud started to talk to women. And he then understood, oh my God, this is from sexual abuse. So his first paper, The Etiology of Hysteria in 1896, said just that. This is what I've discovered. Then the backlash, the predictable backlash from society. So he recanted and then put out the Oedipal theory and said, oh, no, my bad. Children fantasize and want sex with their parents or other adults. And then he created psychoanalysis, which is a very inward focused therapy. And so it denies the outer situation that's happening, all this child abuse that's actually rampant, right? So
That's a good point.
yeah. So it starts back there. So it comes up, it gets repressed, right? And then World War One, shell shock, oh my God, and then it gets suppressed again. And then, and then in the 70s, 80s, Diana Russell, that social worker who did that study, and she actually stated that 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 5 boys will be sexually molested by the time they reach 18. Now I think those statistics are way under what the reality is, but nevertheless, that comes out. The awareness of rape, of incest, of domestic violence starts to come out, and it's not, it wasn't, till, because you're a social worker, it wasn't until 1980 that the AMA put out the diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder. They had been trying to pretend that doesn't exist. And even within the diagnosis, it says events that are outside of the norm. They're not outside of the norm. They're incredibly common. War, rape, incest, these are very, very common. So there's psychology and psychiatry have tried to deny that. And then this is where your documentary that I watched comes in. The False Memory Syndrome Foundation was created. Now, the people on the board of that, the psychiatrists on the board of that, were also the same people who worked in the CIA with MK Ultra. Go figure, right? So it comes out 70s and 80s, then the 90s are like, let's tamp this down. Let's say that these memories are invented. Therapists are putting them in people's heads. So anyway, I was wondering if you'd speak a little to that, because I think that's how trauma has played out, not just in individuals where we go, oh my God, is this real? Oh, am I crazy? Yeah. And it plays out societally in the same manner.
Yeah. And I'm going to put it in my personal perspective because I got my master's degree in 1980. I started doing social work. I did social work 1976 to 1978, and then I got my master's. Yeah, it took 2 years to get my master's. My cousin remembered molestation by her father, my uncle. She would have remembered that in the mid 80s. Yeah, it was, because I visited her in 1985, 1984, 1985. And my parents, really, I think they were doing kind of damage control. They were trying to figure out, like, is she going to be seen as credible? And if she is, I'll say my brother did it. But if not, like my dad didn't want to get caught himself. So they wanted me to go and talk to my cousin, and I did. Traveled and talked to her. And I believed her. I absolutely believed her. But then a few years later, and I'm telling something on myself here. So a few years later, what would have been, the very late night, maybe 1988 or so, I moved to where my cousin lived, to close to where my cousin lived. And we went out to lunch, and she said, well, it's other family members too. And I didn't want to hear that. She wanted to talk about our grandparents. She wanted to talk about other stuff. And I'm like, I don't want to hear that. And so I just didn't. And I was a stay-at-home mom at that time, and I wanted to just kind of cocoon, I guess. But that's still no excuse to treat my cousin like that. And then I got back into my professional world in 1991, and I was seeing, and I was reading this, The Courage to Heal, and I was aware of how much incest there is, and I was seeing that in clients. And then in 1993, I remembered my abuse. Well, all those things happened first. So when I remembered, I could go back and say, my cousin, she remembered sooner, and how hard that was for her to be the first one. And they called her crazy. They made horrible statements about her. She was the first one in the family to divorce. I mean, all these horrible things about her. But then around the time she remembered, or shortly afterwards, my aunt remembered, and two more of my cousins. So 3 cousins and my aunt. So then when I remembered, yeah, I wanted to think I'm crazy because I didn't want to think my dad did any. I didn't think I certainly didn't want to think my mom, my grandparents. But it was hard to do when there's like these 4 people with very similar memories, and I can call and they can, yeah, it was hard to say that I was crazy for those reasons. But I was, of course, affected by the False Memory Syndrome Foundation. And my psychologist at the time knew about them, and she told me about them. And she told me, she gave me when Dr. Jennifer Fried first came public. So what happened with the False Memory Syndrome Foundation was the parents of Dr. Jennifer Fried, a psychologist, a psychology professor, University of Oregon, she privately told her parents she remembered abuse by her father. And she remembered this abuse not in a counseling session. So she privately told her parents. They publicized it just all over. And they were saying not only are her memories wrong, but all memories like this are wrong. They did it, and it was very personal for them to do. I cannot overemphasize how personal. I mean, her dad wanted to stay out of prison, right? So, and they had money. They had a lot of money. And when I interviewed Pam Fried, Dr. Jennifer Fried's mother, Pam Fried is the founder of the False Memory Syndrome Foundation.
Oh, wow.
Her house overlooks Rittenhouse Square in Philadelphia. Now, that is that's the nicest place in Philadelphia. And yeah, you look out the window and you see Rittenhouse, you see that park. And she has a doorman, I've never been in a building with a doorman. The doorman opens the door as I come in, it was a very different world. And they had nothing to lose by going public. Dr. Jennifer Fried, on the other hand, had 2 really young children. And then she was pregnant when she, with her youngest child, her 3rd child, when she first spoke publicly and said her side of things. So they had all these lies about her. I mean, just total lies. And I will say also, she's not a survivor of satanic ritual abuse. I have talked to her privately, and but they said they made it seem like what she was saying was just so bizarre. No, incest by her father in her family home. That's what she was saying. And her sister also wasn't willing to go public. But now I'm not saying this because of anything I heard directly from Dr. Jennifer Fried, but there's enough in the media that I can confidently say it is now public information that Jennifer's only sister, only sibling, is an incest survivor, has publicly stated is an incest survivor. So you have 2 women in the family, highly educated women, by the way, who are saying our father molested us. And they're being called crazy by people who don't know them, and they're not willing to speak out because I don't know Jennifer's sister's reason, but Jennifer has made public her reason. I mean, she had young kids, and she is such a private person. I mean, I have met her. I have heard her speak. She is very shy. And so this was just horrible for her. If things had been different and she'd been ready to speak out, then I think it would have ended up different. But another thing that happened with the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, and I'm just going to speak from the things that I personally know, because I had heard of Dr. Underwager before while I was in graduate school. So I got my degree in 1980. He was already saying statements about, because one of my professors came back from a conference and said, oh yeah, there was someone there who said that if there is incest, it's not that bad, it's no big deal. And I mean, that's so horrible. And I think it was Dr. Underwager making those. And so he had all those years of meeting people, of talking to people who wanted him as a psychiatrist to say, incest isn't so bad. It's okay if you molest your daughter, your stepdaughter, your son. And so he had a mailing list of these people. He had a mailing list of pedophiles. So when Pam Fry decided to start this organization, she got that information. And she really basically admitted that on camera in my film. I didn't know what she would say about that. Boy, she did not want to talk about Underwager because, she didn't want to talk about him. But, it's in writing. So he got kicked off of the False Memory Syndrome Foundation board, but his wife stayed on. She was on the board until she died. Holiday Wakefield, I think is how you say her name. She doesn't have a doctor's degree. So sometimes I call her doctor, but she doesn't. She has been quoted as saying they were both quoted and they were interviewed for a European journal that promotes pedophilia. And she was quoted as saying, he was quoted as saying that God, something to the effect that God accepts all sexuality. If you're, a pedophile, you can say, yeah, you can proudly say, God accepts me. But she was quoted as saying that she thought it would be a good idea to have widespread research so that they could see how pedophilia does affect people, and they would research adults in loving relationships with 12-year-old, 11 and 12-year-old boys, loving relationships with children, and see how it affected them. And I'm like, no, you can't do that. That's illegal. And and I'm like, why did she get to stay on the board after saying that? And she continued on the board. And then they also have Dr. Elizabeth Loftus was on the board. They used her research. And I think you're going to have Flynn Crook on a podcast. So she'd be able to tell you more about the research and all, but they did this shoddy research that really can't even be called research, where you can they prove that if you say to a research subject, your older brother said you got lost in a mall, then the research subject will say, yeah, maybe I did. That doesn't prove anything. That just proves that your older brother or sister can mess with you. We already know that, don't we? We already know. Or if my aunt says that or whatever. And the other thing that's interesting to me, they use lost in the mall. Well, how many people have not been lost in the mall? How many parents can honestly say, I have never misplaced my child, even for a moment, in any store? That you're just not going to get it. That just happens occasionally, even parents who try to be really good parents. So they're getting a memory mixed up. They have been lost in the mall or lost in a store or whatever, and they're remembering that feeling of being lost. So they have an actual experience to remember, totally different than because a therapist cannot convince someone that something happened like an older sibling can, because they can't say, I was here when it happened, I'm eyewitness. And that's how the Lost in the Mall study happened, was you can convince someone, a younger party to something if you say, I was there when it happened.
Yeah. Well, and how ludicrous is it? What therapist would want to convince someone that they had been sexually or ritually abused? That's just insane. And what person would want to say that happened to me? I mean, it's shameful. It's like the whole thing is crazy. But to go back a little bit to what you were saying, there are people who do say pedophilia is good, that it's a loving relationship. That's not love. That's abuse. It totally breaks who that child can possibly be later in life. It's very, very destructive. And there's plenty of psychological evidence to back that up.
Oh, yeah.
But see, the world, pedophilia undergirds the entire control structure of this planet. So the globalists, the elites, the people at the top of the pyramid are pedophiles and they're Satanists. So they have their agenda has always been to normalize pedophilia in society. And it's taken, it's something very difficult to do, because if you're a normal human being and if you're a parent, you would never, that's completely, it's antithetical to who we are as human beings.
It is.
We instinctively protect children,
We do.
and this lie that Freud started and then Kinsey perpetuated, that children are sexual from birth, that's not true. They go through their stages, and that doesn't happen till after puberty. So this is all an agenda. And if we look at what's going on today here in the United States, and I believe in other countries as well, they have succeeded now. The WHO and the UN a few months ago put out a guidance, and they said that children are sexual from birth, and by kindergarten, they should be taught masturbation, oral and anal sex, same-sex relationships, and they should have access to pornography. This was actually put out, and then in the school system here in the US, they're now teaching children these things, and they have basically books that are pornographic for kindergartners and elementary and high school. I've seen some of these books. They have drawings like of a boy giving a man fellatio. And this is supposed to be what they call a loving relationship, right? And then they show.
And I personally, I do not have personal knowledge of that. Like, I've done volunteer work at my grandkids' schools, and I haven't seen any sign of that. And I haven't. Yeah, I have not seen any sign of that.
I've
in
seen
my
the books.
School, so. I'm not doubting that there are books like that, but I'm just saying, at the schools my grandkids go to, I babysit with a little girl. She's just about to turn 8, and I've been babysitting with her since she's 5. And she doesn't. That would not be the case. Her parents absolutely would not allow that. Absolutely.
I'm glad to hear that that's not the case there, but I have seen and been contacted by many parents in different states. They have actually gone to the school board to show these books and to talk about what's going on in the classroom. And when they read passages from the books or try and show it on the visual, the school board's like, you can't, that's inappropriate. So they're shut down from showing these things because it's inappropriate for adults. But these same parents are pointing out, this is what our kids are bringing home these books. Our kids are being taught these things in the classroom. I read an article recently that about 2 German daycare centers, even before school, who have masturbation rooms for children, and they encourage them to play doctor with each other. In general, if you look at the decades from the 40s to today, you can see a social engineering and grooming of society to accept pedophilia. You can see more, the free sex, and then on sitcoms, children like at younger and younger ages are dating. There's that hookup culture. So societally, we have been engineered. Countries in the last few years have lowered the age of consent from 18, then 16, then 14. Now the age of consent's about 12, So I'm saying that there's a deliberate societal, run by these people at the top who are pedophiles to groom people to accept it and to normalize it. So of
Yeah.
course, I'm not surprised that you interviewed this guy and he's like, oh, pedophilia is maybe a good thing. I mean, they are now saying that more openly, and it's very, very disturbing.
And I again haven't seen that. The people who see my film are so disgusted by that, by what he says. And I'm really glad I got it on camera. But
Yeah.
and also, well, yeah, a psychologist, Dr. Lauren Pancras, who at the time I interviewed him was on the False Memory Syndrome Foundation board, said that it's not harmful to a child. And then Eleanor Goldstein, who has written books. She is one reason the False Memory Syndrome Foundation got so much attention, because she had a company that all the libraries worked with her company, and so she could disseminate information, and she had already a printing company, and she co-wrote 2 books with Pam Fry. So she's one of the reasons that got out so quickly. And it's her daughter and granddaughter who I interviewed, who I was saying were just so wonderful to be interviewed in Mothers and Molestation. But yeah, I just speak only from my personal experience, and I see a lot of people appalled by it. I yeah, and I this is different than most SRA survivors, but I just choose to see the world as mostly good. That's how I choose to see it. And I can't debate it with someone, because all I can tell you is my personal experience. And I, I do believe that incest has happened. I mean, it's in the Bible, it's in the Old Testament, or what the Jewish community would call the Torah. And I mean, it's disgusting, it's bad, but it happens. Sibling incest. I have one of my friends is a co-founder of an organization, 5 Waves, that's to bring out information about sibling incest. And they say it's the most common. And I think that's probably true, because the siblings are so accessible. And she's a survivor of sibling incest. And so, yeah, so we bring that out. But I just want to say, no matter how much evidence we have, because this friend of mine, Maria Sokoloff, is a Harvard educated scientist, and she had recovered memory, and she ended up on disability because of her chronic pain that was a result of her her mind needing to protect her from the memory
Right.
of a one-time incident with her brother. So, and then she gets people saying that her recovered memories aren't true because what happened to her wasn't bad enough. I get people saying, and I'm sure you too do too, that my recovery memories aren't true because what I have to say is so extremely bizarre. I mean, they just do not. There are people who don't want to believe it. And at least with the case of the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, those organizers, a lot of them were pedophiles. I mean,
Oh
I
yeah,
think there's a
all
lot of evidence to that fact that many of them were pedophiles. And so they were trying to protect themselves. And hopefully because I think we did have a Me Too movement in the 80s, and hopefully our Me Too movement here now will be, will really do what it needs to do, that people can speak out. And yet, I will say, I got kicked out of my Toastmasters group because I talked about my abuse. And I was in Toastmasters as a public speaking organization so that I could more effectively give talks about my abuse. And then I got kicked out because they didn't want to hear it anymore. So, it's it, what I want to say to survivors is, I know it's really hard, especially if you're first remembering, and it's okay for you. It's one thing I did when I was first remembering, because I would think this just can't be true. And it would mess me up so much on those days when I questioned myself. So I started only allowing myself to question myself twice a week. So there were 2 days a week. And anytime I questioned myself, like, this just can't be true. Okay, I got to wait until Tuesday or Thursday to do this. And then later it was just once a week. But when you're first remembering, it's so normal to question yourself, but it's so counterproductive. So when I made my film, this was 20 years after I remembered my abuse that I started making it. Is that right? I made it in 2000. Yeah, 20 years later, started in 2013. And I came up with the idea because I had applied to an MFA program, and I wrote this essay that I've talked about that has to do with the KKK for a sample of my writing, and they were going to admit me. They said the writing wasn't good enough, but they'd work with me some on the writing because they could see, the potential I had, and but then the same day I got a letter saying I was accepted, I got a phone call saying I wasn't. And the reason was, I think they didn't believe me that something like that could have happened. And so the reason I made my film, and I'll be done in just a minute, but the reason I made my film, the next morning I woke up, I thought about hiring a private investigator to prove about this murder. But then I thought, that's going to cost a lot of money. I might as well just spend that money doing a documentary. And the next morning I woke up with the title for my documentary, Am I Crazy? And I just knew that's a good title because you want a question, you want something. And so I'm like, am I crazy? And then I spent 2 months reading only things that the false memory syndrome put out. 2 months only reading their material. And I did that because they say, oh, a survivor can just read a book and then they think they're a survivor of ritual abuse. That's not true. You can't read a book. A book cannot change your mind like that. So I did what they said. And so, yeah, I'm really glad that part of my life is over. That was really hard questioning those people.
Yeah. And, perpetrators require secrecy and silence to continue perpetrating.
Exactly.
I mean, that is, so there's always going to be a silencing and saying these people are crazy and they're making this up because that protects the perpetrators. I mean, when I was a little girl, I would be taken into my uncle's facility and tortured and brutalized in all kinds of ways. And then I would be cleaned up and put in a very fancy dress and taken to some party where there would be like VIP people. And I was raised in that kind of way where, I lived in nice homes and in various countries and, cocktail parties with presidents and people like that, dignitaries, that kind of thing. So I would be in one, completely horrific situation and then be put in this other situation as if, all dressed, and I would be told, smile, and so that was to create in me this, and then of course I would be told after every torture or rape or anything that, well, that didn't happen. So they would put that into my mind. And then, at some point I was programmed to, if I told, I should commit suicide. And when I did start in therapy to tell and talked with my therapist, that came bursting out and I was extremely suicidal. And I was strong enough to understand that, okay, this isn't me, like, so I didn't, follow through, but there is a lot of effort made with even individual survivors in their families or in their cults to make it seem like this didn't happen. And then the other thing that's kind of psychologically interesting, since you're a mental health professional, is I would be, for example, forced to do these impossible choices. Like my uncle would have two people in two rooms in the facility, and they would have bombs strapped in their mouths. And I would, one being my sister and one being a strange woman. And I would be told, you have to push the button to blow one or the other up. And I would say, no, I'm not going to do that. And then he would say, well, then I'm going to kill them both. So then I would be forced to choose and do something horrific. And then I would be told, well, you're a killer, you chose to do it, or, he would capture gypsies in Rome because they were undocumented and, line up like 20 people and tell me, put a gun in my hand and say, you either have to shoot one of these people or I'm going to shoot all of them. So what a choice. I thought, well, if I shoot one, then he'll spare the rest, right? But then I would be told, well, you did that. And, there was an elite party I was taken to when I was 5 that I remember very vividly, all dressed up. And my mom was taken too. And, we were taken into this room. And then the choice was, so we'll either rape your mother or we'll rape you. You choose. And so because I wanted to protect my mother, I said me. And then I would be told later, well, see, you wanted it, you chose it, right? So there's so many ways that they mess with survivors' heads.
Yeah.
And forget the shame of having those violations and all that. So it's really deep and really complicated stuff. But what I keep saying is, okay, there are statistics. We know how many children go through, we can say only incest, so it's not ritual abuse and all these other things, but this is actually more common than it's not. But who, people ask me, they say, well, you seem okay. Well, yeah, I did a lot of healing work. I've recovered myself. Believe me, that work itself was brutal. And I'm still working on myself, but they think, well, if you're not a complete deranged mess lying in a ditch with a needle in your arm, then nothing happened to you. But see, why would I say that happened to me? I wouldn't want that to. I wish that hadn't happened to me. So why would survivors say something like that if it didn't happen? That's really, to me, the ultimate point, where this false memory syndrome foundation, people are crazy. It's like, why would anyone say that if it hadn't happened?
I agree. I totally agree. I mean, yeah. And not only that, but it was like, one of my questions is, why would I think it for 20 years? Right. I mean, they're saying a therapist said this to me 20 years ago, or are you talking about a more recent therapist? And so I didn't let myself have therapy during the time I was making the film either. I'm like, they say a therapist tells me, okay, I'm not going to a therapist. I'm just talking to people from the False Memory Syndrome Foundation. Let's see what happens. So I was really nervous. My first interview was with Pam Fried, and I was so nervous. And what I specifically didn't want to believe is that my mother had sexually abused me. And I had this pain, really horrible pain. And it would not go away until I would say, yeah, she did. I know she did. And that was going on when the cinematographer, when we pulled up to that was just like it was like the night before. I wouldn't have been able to sleep if I didn't say, yeah. But I didn't want to say that on camera. And then later I made the film, my Mothers and Molestation, which I very much tell about that. So but all the things you say, yes. I mean, I could give examples for myself. What happened for me, and I know this was different than some survivors, but I only remembered it while it was going on. I don't know how they... Right. Oh, I know the things they did. I know the types of torture they did. But I only remembered it while it was going on, and I just had no memory of it except for while it was going on. I talked to other survivors who at a certain age, like at age 9, my mind let me start forgetting, or, whatever. But mine, it was, I don't remember ever knowing it except for while it was going on, except for at a deeper part of myself, I knew it because I knew I was not safe. the first time I ever felt safe, I have a video telling about this, but it was in 2010 after I married my husband. And we went to this really nice restaurant for Christmas Day. And, my husband's Jewish. But anyway, there were just all these happy families. And I realized I'm one of the happy families. I am safe. But I went through so much of my life not feeling safe.
Yeah.
And yeah, I like to tell survivors I feel totally safe now. It's such a nice feeling that can be in your future.
Yeah. And I feel that way too. I have a great life as well. But, there were so many times in my adult life that even the things that I hadn't yet remembered were totally affecting me. So
Oh
I
yeah.
lived so many years with like this fear and anxiety in me, and I would see like it would probably be dads with their daughters out, and I would immediately feel like a throat panic that that girl is kidnapped and God knows what the man is doing. Like, why was I thinking that? That doesn't make any sense. And a really interesting one, Mary, is when I was pregnant, and then I went, I was giving birth, and it was 26 hours, and I was pushing for 4 hours, and my daughter just wouldn't come out. And they did a C-section, and then, she was fine and everything. And then I was in the little room with her, and they wanted me to put her in the little bassinet, and I wouldn't. I wanted her on my body. And when they took her to the room to do the, whatever they do, I flipped out and started screaming. And I told my husband, they're killing her. They're killing her. Now, why was I saying that? Well, when I was a teenager with the raping, I was impregnated. And, this is a satanic ritual thing that I've heard other survivors, this has happened to them. They wait till you're almost at term and then induce the birth. And then they take the baby and they either kill it in front of you or they use it for rituals. So that had happened to me. I hadn't consciously remembered it, but my body knew. And that's why 4 hours of pushing, my daughter wouldn't come out, because my body was like, I'm not going to let this one be killed or taken from me, right? And then afterwards, when they took her away, I was convinced they had killed her. I didn't even know why I was saying that, right? So we know what we know, like somehow the body knows, right? So you may not consciously remember the memory, but you always do remember the memory, in my opinion.
I agree. I agree. And a lot of survivors have something that makes, like, for my father to say he was sexually attracted to me when I was 13. I mean, that's, and when I told that to Eleanor Goldstein, who's with the FMSF, she said, well, at what age? And I do. She's like, you don't remember what age? Well, I do. I was about 13. But at what age would that be okay for a father to say to their child? It's never okay to say that. And so, there were things that made it make sense. How jealous my mother was of me. There were things that my life makes more sense now. And, but yeah, the recovered memories for me, I mean, people who do therapists know this happens a lot. And even if you don't, most people, trauma survivors, you don't remember all of it all at once, or some people always remember it, but they haven't dealt with it emotionally until later. Marilyn Vanderveer was real helpful to me, and that's my psychologist, not the first one I saw after I remembered things, but not the one who did hypnosis, but a later psychologist gave me a tape of, it was back when you had the old,
cassette tape.
Old tapes, yeah. And so I put it in my living room. I was watching it, and Marilyn Vanderveer was, she's former Miss America, and I have been able to talk to her, but she would have everyone stand. She would say, if you're a survivor and you're comfortable standing, please do. And so I remember standing in my living room, And just watching that. But I talked to her since, and I said, when I watched that, I thought, what Marilyn is doing for incest survivors, I want to do for survivors of satanic ritual abuse. And she said, and now you are. So I was just thrilled to get to talk to her. But so I did have good interviews in my film that were very positive. That was one of them. And there's Dr. Susie Wyatt, Salt Lake City, said she says such good things, and she's on camera. And Dr. Bezel Vanderkolk, I was really lucky to get that interview, very fortunate to get that interview. And he and I did say, do you believe that satanic ritual abuse occurs? And he said, yes, I do. Yes, sadly it does. Sadly it does.
Yeah, so, he's great.
He is. But I mean, the thing about recovered memories, they just make sense. You don't want all the trauma you've experienced in your life readily accessible to you at all times during times you don't need it. Even, when my cousin was had remembered things about other relatives and I didn't want to talk to her, I also just kind of wanted some time to just be away from social work. I was a stay-at-home mom for 2 or 3, well, I guess 3 years. And I just wanted away from all of that. And I started thinking, well, incest doesn't happen that often. I know it does. I'd worked in the field. I knew it did. But when we have a speaker or something, I'd be like, I don't think that happens that often, because I just was around moms of young kids, and we had a preschool PTA, and I was all involved in that world. And not to say that it wasn't happening right before my eyes, but anyway, I emotionally got out of that world. And then I saw the movie Nuts with Barbara Streisand. She's tells about her incest experience. And when I watched that movie that night, I couldn't sleep. I felt so guilty I was not working. I felt so guilty I was not working. Why would I? I had 2 children. We could afford for me to stay home with them. Why would I feel that guilty? But I had to get up in the middle of the night because I just couldn't stand. I had nightmare all night about that I should be working. And now that makes sense, that what the movie's about and my reaction to it now makes sense, but it didn't before.
Well, just so people really understand this, it's completely normal that you would want to kind of push that away, particularly because you were raising small children. How do you hold the horror of what happened to you and be present with your children? So the reason that we have amnesia for these horrific events, it's a protective thing that our psyche does. When a child is being raped or brutalized in whatever way, it's too much. It's too much. If you were to be able to hold it, it would kill you. So it's a very clever mechanism of our psyche. It splits it off. I always had this internal image of myself. Remember in the old days when libraries had these card catalogs drawer that you'd put out and you'd look at, they'd have all, it's all digital now, but that's how I imagined it inside myself. Like I would just put a memory in one of those drawers and close it. Something else would happen, put it away, close it. That's the only way I could survive and keep going, is to completely put away all these memories. I mean, that is actually completely normal, and it's normal for everyone. And I think that's why people don't even want to hear our testimony when we talk about these things, because it's too much just for them to hear it. Imagine how hard it was to actually be experiencing it. Of course, the psyche does that. And that's completely normal. But then there's this additional piece, which is what they do with satanic ritual abuse and MK Ultra. So in that case, they deliberately do something to the child so that that split off will happen. and then a new, like a fresh blank slate alter is there. And this is how they program these children to be super soldiers or assassins or, sex pots. So this is a different thing, but they know this about the psyche, and they use this deliberately in MK Ultra to create multiples, to create people that are fragmented, so they can program different parts to do different things, and then different parts don't know what the other one is doing. They don't even have access to that. So the fact that even and multiples happen just sort of organically as well with severe trauma, again, it's a coping mechanism. You split off so that you can continue to survive and live, and different parts are aware of what happened, but other parts, or maybe the main part, isn't. And so it is important to, to heal and recover yourself and integrate when you're ready.
When
So
you're
that's
ready.
an interesting piece. When do your memories come back? I think when you're ready to have them back, when it's not going to break you.
Exactly. When you're safe enough. Yeah. And a lot of people, it's after they have children. I know,
Yep.
it would have, I remember when I really knew my father wasn't safe, but I just didn't want to say so. And I was like, boy, I'd give up anything I have if I didn't have to think of my father that way. But what I wouldn't give up is my sons. And it's like, he cannot be around my sons. He cannot be. So I was more protective of my sons than of myself. And I think that's when I remembered, was when I got to that point that I was safe because of my love for my sons. And different people, it's different things. But the people who always remember it, they're the ones who commit suicide as kids.
Yes.
They're
Yes.
the ones who are already on the streets. I mean, my husband and I were foster parents, and one of those kids, I hope she ever has a good life, but she remembers, and I hope she ever is able to go to school and learn. And I mean, it's affecting her so much in every way. She can't learn math. She can't, and so my mind protected me. But I've been around kids that their mind didn't, and they're discounted, because who's going to believe this kid because he doesn't even have a high school diploma? Who's going to ever believe him? The you're not believed because you have problems, and then you're not believed because you don't have problems. You're not believed either way. But people who regain memories as adults tend to have a more stable adult life than those who have always remembered.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you what it was like to interview Elizabeth Loftus, because when I was watching your documentary, I wanted to punch her. I was like, oh, and you were so calm, And, so I would just like you to speak a little about that interview. And I have a suspicion that this woman was abused, and that her
She
part of
was.
her thing is her own need to deny what happened to her. So what do you think about that?
Okay, so Dr. Elizabeth Loftus is the researcher who gave the False Memory Syndrome Foundation some really shoddy research that they ran with. Okay, so she initially, Dr. Jennifer Fried was really shocked that Dr. Loftus didn't agree with her, because they had already talked about, she had already basically said that she could understand the whole recovered memory thing. And then she did this. I was, of course, lucky to get that interview too. And I called her once, and she said no, she was too busy, and suggested I talk to Dr. Lauren Pancras, which I did. And then later I called again. She said, well, I can talk to you. And so I flew out, me and a cinematographer flew out to Southern California. And I write about in my book that the cinematographer is really a nice person, but he really Loftus charmed him. He's like, she's got some good points. And I said, I've told him since that survivors who see that just hate Loftus. And he's like, oh, well, it's probably the way you edited it. No, there was no way I could have edited that to make Loftus look good because of what she was saying about survivors. But she was sexually abused by a babysitter when she was like 6. And and so I asked her how that affected her, and she's like, oh, that didn't affect me at all. But she told me that because she'd written about this, when she was 13, she thought she was pregnant. I said, but you wrote about that you thought when you were 13, you thought you were pregnant from this sexual abuse at age 6. And she's like, yeah, I thought that. I mean, you were talking about a very highly intelligent woman. Her IQ is really high. 13. I mean, 13-year-olds know things, right? And her period didn't come as soon as her friends. And so she decides she's pregnant from a fondling incident at age 6, from fondling at age 6. Even if it had just happened, it was fondling, and that's it. She couldn't have been pregnant, but she had in her mind that, oh, the sperm just stuck around in your body for years. I mean, yeah. She is affected by her abuse. She is affected by her abuse. And the way it affects her is that she never wanted her parents to know about her own abuse. And so she's trying to protect all of society from knowing about any abuse. I mean, it very much, I think it's the reason she does what she does. Yeah. Is because she was abused. That's the reason she does it, not the other way around, that it doesn't affect her. And she's so adamant about it. I had 2 hours with her, and I was really nervous that I could get everything in. I was really nervous that she'd just stop the interview because she'd be like, she could tell I wasn't praising her or whatever. And I didn't. A lot of the interview, I interviewed about a case, and the survivor on that case didn't want to be included in my documentary, so I can't show any of that. And she was really cruel to that survivor, I will say that, but I couldn't include it. And but I mean, just what she says about Marilyn Vanderveer, like, I know Marilyn's story is not true. And then she says, I don't know anything about her, really. I mean, she lies on camera. I'm so glad I got that. Yeah. I mean, the thing is, if you can mess with someone who was Miss America, and Miss America used to be a bigger deal than it is now. Before the Super Bowl, it was the most popular, most watched show. They didn't have swimsuit competition at first either. And when Marilyn was in it, they didn't televise the swimsuit. So, but I mean, she was a huge celebrity, and they're doubting her. Like, what does she want? Attention? She already got it. And right. She's not someone who needed money. Her father was a billionaire. Her husband's a extremely successful attorney. What would be her motivation? And yet they're saying she is not telling the truth. And she has one sister who's gone public. She has 3 sisters, and one of them has gone public about incest by their father. I mean, they're doubting people like Dr. Jennifer Fried. I mean, look at how much she's done professionally. She was on Obama's task force for sexual assault on college campuses. I mean, she's accomplished so much. And her sister, her only sibling, and I talked also to Dr. Jennifer Fried's uncle, and the whole family on the father's side, the paternal family, they have family reunions, and Jennifer and her sister are there, so it's all the rest of the family says it. And Marilyn's told me, like, no one in my family has ever disputed it. She has no relatives who's ever disputed it. So it's partly, I don't think it's so many people disputing it as the people who dispute it have made so much noise. And the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, they were good business people. I will just say they were pedophiles who were good business people.
Yep. And it's people have, like, you can't fake a flashback.
No.
I have had flashbacks. I have had nightmares. You have these weird physical body things that happen. I mean, there's no way to make that up. And the torment, the inner torment that I had inside me until I did my healing work was unbelievable. Why would I do that to myself? Just and no one was. I wasn't getting attention for that. I mean, it's ludicrous. It's completely. It's obvious as hell that these deniers of trauma and of sexual abuse and of ritual abuse are doing it because they're perpetrators and they want to protect themselves. That's the ultimate only explanation that makes actual sense in this situation.
Well, yeah. And then I think also people who aren't perpetrators, some people who aren't perpetrators want to protect themselves from that knowledge. Yes. But the other thing is the relatives. If I say how many people don't believe me, almost all of them are related to my abusers.
Right.
By blood or marriage, almost all of them. And so I like survivors to know this, because if you've only told your family, well, and there's perpetrators in your family, sure, you're going to feel like most people don't believe me. But I wondered what would happen when I went so public. And what happened is almost everyone believes me. It is almost everyone believes me. That's what happened. I thought these horrible things would happen. Nothing horrible happened.
Yeah. So, thank you for having the courage to do that. And I mean, you did something interesting, which is you immersed yourself for a couple of months in the False Memory Syndrome Foundation literature. So you gave yourself a chance to say, okay, maybe I made this up. Let me immerse myself in their reality and see if that changes things. And it did not. It actually reinforced what you already knew. So I think it's brave of you and all of us who have stepped up and stepped forward and told our stories, because we already know we're going to be met with pushback from the perpetrators. And like you say, from people, people have told me many times, like, I can't hear that. That's too much, and I get that. But we went through it. And yes, it is too much. And I tell people like that, look, I need to say it out loud because there are other children this is being done to right now as we're talking in this interview, probably dozens, right? So we have a responsibility, in my opinion, as adults, to protect the children of this planet, whether they're ours or not. All children deserve love and protection and a good upbringing. And so I can't be silent knowing that other children are being, whether it's incest in the family or all the way to satanic ritual abuse and trafficking, it doesn't matter. That needs to go out. So like you, I can tell my story and other people have told their story. And the reason why we do it isn't because we want attention or because we just want to, traumatize people. It's because this is still happening and we need to stop it. And you cannot stop something you don't know anything about. And that's been the success of mind control, that people, they're apathetic, they're obedient, they're in denial. But if you're in denial, then you're actually in a way complicit, because you're allowing this to continue, this perpetration to continue. And so my thing is, we need to stop this and we need to end it. And one way to do that is for those of us who are healed enough to come up and tell our story and speak out, so that we can bring awareness to this, so that we can, liaison with others and find ways to stop this from happening, right?
Yes, that's the whole, that I want to give comfort to current survivors, but I want to, as much as I can, protect children. One of my essays in my book that I really like for people from religious organizations to read is on child sexual, how to prevent child sexual abuse in church settings. And if anyone who is involved in a church or synagogue or other religious organization wants that essay, please email me and I will send that to you free. But it's in my book, and I do have, I don't always like to read something that's highly triggering. And so that's why I have the trigger warnings, is that people like myself, then I might be more likely to read a book if I know when, which parts to read when. And so that's why I have trigger warnings in each of mine. But I went ahead and put details about, I have examples of child sex trafficking. I have, that's an essay. I have examples of satanic ritual abuse. That's another essay. And and then the one related to the KKK, because it does give those very specific things. But I also have an essay that I just did a medium trigger warning on, the difference between child sex trafficking and ritualistic abuse, or and it tells about that. And I will say, in my experience, everyone I've known who's a satanic ritual abuse survivor is also a survivor of child sex trafficking. We are trafficked as a part of this ritualistic abuse. And it doesn't necessarily work the other way around. But another thing, this has been recently, I was at a global conference, and I went public about being an SRA survivor, and someone asked me to do training for their organization. This is an organization in Utah that provides housing for sex trafficking survivors, for adults who are being sex trafficked. Well, they are getting lots of survivors of satanic ritual abuse. And so what's happening is they're providing a safe place for these adults. And then after the adult's there for a while, they're like, well, this also happened to me. This also happened to me. And a really nice organization, they were asking me, should we put that in our original intake paperwork? I said, you can, or you don't have to, but they're not going to tell you to start with. Someone's not going to come in and tell you the most horrific things, the most bizarre things that have ever happened. And so I was just educating them, because that's going to be a part of the work they do. And that's what I'm finding is, now that there is more treatment for sex trafficking survivors, we're learning that there's more satanic ritual abuse survivors than we thought.
Yeah. Well, Mary, we've been going for actually 2 hours. It's gone by so fast.
Wow.
I've enjoyed this conversation. So I just want to wrap up and thank you for your documentary, for being here, and for I really wanted to interview you because I think it's something important for survivors. They're going to relate to what you and I have both said. Like, yeah, we've all felt crazy. Yeah, we've all been scared we won't be believed. Yeah, we've all said things and then had pushback. This is part of it. And so I'm really glad that we got to sort of talk about that. And thank you for your bravery and for speaking out. And I'll just leave you with any last words that you want to tell people.
One thing I like to always say is that if you're listening to this and your abuse was not as extensive as mine, please don't compare. Yes. That any abuse is devastating. Any abuse is devastating. And so don't do either of us the injustice of comparing. And that I greatly respect anyone in recovery, regardless of the extent of their abuse. And as I that's I wrote in my book many different things about my own healing. I mean, I wrote 10,000 words about my own healing. And I just encourage you to take time to heal. One of my pieces of advice is consider it your part-time job, and that it's going to pay off, but maybe not for a long time, but it will pay off. And I used to have severe fibromyalgia, chronic pain, and now I'm healthy. And I just want to give as much encouragement as I can.
Thank you so much, Mary. It's been a pleasure. And maybe, maybe you can come back another time and we can talk about our healing that we both did and see if
Oh,
that
yeah.
inspires and helps people. So let's just
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
you come back then and we'll talk
Okay.
about that.
Oh,
Um,
great. And so, yeah, I'm pleased with everything we've covered.
good. Well, until next time then.